No, I don't.
Are you sure? Don't walk from here. This is live. Can you see? Can you see? It has to be right in the middle. Right in the middle. Cannot be too sweet. Shiryak is my favorite. Yeah. Like Jamil on her. Uh-huh. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But not. Where's that? I get mine from Shams. Oh, Shams? Yeah, I get some from Afghan ice cream grill. So many of them. There's like, you get the very, oh, and Sanaa is my favorite. It's really good. Sanaa's really good. Have you been to Sanaa? Their food is really good. Yeah, their shit. Yeah, just for the ice cream, you know. And sometimes it's just nice to get. Yeah, I have also. Just sometimes it's just nice to get on the road, you know. Get out of the sun and go into driving. Yeah, you know, like I used to drive every day to Sacramento, you know, sit down there, and I don't get to drive much anymore. But the moral of the story is, just sometimes to break the monotony, it's just nice to get a nice slow drive. And a cup of coffee. Okay. 49? Where's that? Mm-hmm. 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 Really? It's called Route 49? Where it is? In the opposite, right? Really? How long? It should be like a full month. Is the extra room in there? Is it deep enough? Or is it just like more? Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. If you guys want to grab your coffee and your refreshments until I get set up over here, so you have like a minute and a half. So take your time.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Almighty Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family and his companions and all the righteous men and women that walk in their footsteps. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among them. Allahumma ameen. Brothers and sisters, Jazakallah khair for joining us, whether you are here in person or joining the live broadcast on YouTube. We appreciate your presence and your du'as. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and make you amongst the true students of sacred knowledge. We're still in the shade of this profound surah, Surat Al-Nisa, a surah named after women, and a surah about the rights of vulnerable groups. And I said before that this surah was revealed in those 2 years of peace, pretty much after the truce of Hudaybiyah and before the conquest of Mecca. So years 6 to 8 after Hijrah, roughly speaking. And because of the relative peace that took place in the community as a result of the treaty, it was now time to refocus and pay attention to internal matters that have been put off, things that needed to be addressed in the community, social matters, that it was impossible to address them because of the constant conflict that was taking place. And I said before that any civilization is measured by its ability to protect the rights of the vulnerable. If a government protects the rights of the billionaires, well, that's what governments do. That says nothing about government. In fact, that is the predictable behavior of those who are in power. We are able to characterize a government or a state or a community as righteous, as civilized, when that government or that state takes care of the vulnerable groups that are not able to defend themselves. And we've seen in the course of Surah Al-Nisa thus far that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about the refugees. In fact, this is how the surah was opened. The rights of children, the rights of orphans, the rights of prisoners, the rights of slaves, and among other things, obviously. And we said that the reason An-Nisa, or women, was used as the title of the surah is that women are a paradoxical category, because women are certainly not a minority, yet they are often treated as such. They may actually constitute slightly more than men in any given society, statistically speaking, yet they are always often treated as if they are a minority. Their rights are trampled over, and they have been subjected to all kinds of harassment, all kinds of injustices throughout the centuries. At least, if you're black, then you are only subjected to anti-black racism if you are a minority in, let's say, a majority white society, right? So if you live in Africa, it would be difficult to imagine that that you would be subjected to racism. You're subjected to other things, but you're not subjected to racism. If you are poor and therefore suffer because of your poverty in a classist system, then at least you don't suffer from that type of discrimination amongst other poor people. But only women will suffer from discrimination against women under any circumstance, in any country, in any society, and in any historical context, right? So women basically became emblematic of those rights. And if we're able to establish equity in the treatment of women, then we are more than likely to establish equity in the treatment of other vulnerable groups in society, as I have said before. And thus far, I think we've covered all kinds of controversial topics. I hope that we've covered them successfully and effectively. We talked about all kinds of ahkam pertaining to women. We talked about marriage. We talked about polygamy. We even talked about the taking of slave girls and concubinage and so forth. We even talked about inheritance, which is usually the one subject that riles people up. Yet, alhamdulillah, no one threw any tomatoes at me thus far. Um, so inshallah, we continue the conversation today. And just to kind of refresh your memories, going back to the rules of inheritance, which I hope inshallah we covered extensively, I said before that in the Islamic ethos, inheritance is a form of rizq. It's a form of providence from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, it is not us that decide the portions and the shares and the allocations. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that manages, He defines and manages the distribution, right? That's a very important, spiritual checkpoint that we need to kind of stop at in order to appraise ourselves and how we examine Islamic law, right? I also said that inheritance in Islam is not based in equality, rather it is based in equity. It is based in responsibility. It is based in what people are expected to do with the wealth. And in the Islamic system, when the man is carrying the religious responsibility of taking care of his family, taking care of his parents, taking care of his children, and including and also taking care of his wife, obviously, then the man is usually entitled to more. And we've seen this play itself out in how boys inherit more than girls, and how fathers inherit more than mothers, and how husbands inherit more than wives, and so on and so forth, right? And just if we were to kind of go through our list here, to refresh your memories of what we've covered thus far. I'm going to go through some of the examples that we've covered, right? So, in a scenario, I'm not going to cover everything, but in general, if a husband or wife die and they are leaving behind only sons and daughters, they don't have any other heirs, they don't have any parents, no one, just their kids will inherit them, right? So in general, the boy gets 2 shares compared to the girl, right? The girl gets 1 share, the boy gets 2 shares, right? That is, again, in general. If there's a sort of surviving spouse, the husband usually gets 1/4, the wife gets 1/8, as we've said before, right? If there is only one surviving daughter and the daughter is the heir, she gets 1/2, the rest goes to the grandparents. And if there is more than one daughter, 2 plus, they get 2/3 combined, and then the rest, the 1/3, goes to the grandparents or the uncles or aunts, whoever else is in line basically for inheritance. I'm sorry, yes. Did we talk about this last time? Yeah, we did not cover that last time. And so, in general, if you leave behind, more than one wife, they basically are getting that same share. It's divided by all of them, because you have to remember that it's the sons and the daughters. In Islamic inheritance, the sons and the daughters are the ones that are supposed to get most of the inheritance. Everyone else gets symbolic shares, because the idea here is that this is how life continues. Therefore, it's the young ones that are more deserving of that, more than anyone else. And so, that is, I think, essentially the point that needs to be made here. We also talks about the grandfathers, and we said that the grandfather, gets 1/6. Also, the grandmother gets 1/6. We talked about this. And in the event that none of this, all of these people that are supposed to inherit are not in the picture, no father, no son, nothing like that, then, basically brother and sister, they get 1/2. And if none of this exists and you only have half sister, even that there is inheritance for that, paternal sister, paternal brother, and so forth. They also get one half. Even situations where the mother dies and she has children from a previous marriage, her kids from a previous marriage will still inherit from her as well.
Will the same go for like children from a previous marriage of a father?
As long as they're hers.
His.
Like, so let's say that you're married today, right?
And he
And then you,
children.
the mother passed away. Her husband is still, her husband is not around anymore. It's just her. And she has kids from this husband, but she also has kids from a previous husband. They all inherit from her.
I'm talking about the husband does the same thing.
Does what?
If the husband, the mother and the father, and he has other wives and other children, and he passes away,
Mm-hmm.
do those children also benefit?
Of course, because they're his. Yeah. If they're blood, they're his. Therefore, they get the same percentage of distribution.
And the wives?
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm. Much smaller shares, but yes, they will all get something.
One more clarification.
Uh-huh.
In rare cases that somebody passes away and leaves no one to inherit, is that like a commonwealth?
Yeah, so usually it goes to Baytul Mal. It goes to, whatever the central government, and then the government decides what to do with the wealth in the absence of a will. If there is a wasiyah, if there is a will, then obviously we have to follow that. But in the absence of a wasiyah, then basically the government will have to decide. Yeah. So again, if you do like a simple search online, or if you go on AI or whatever, Claude or ChatGPT, and but you have to verify, by the way, sometimes they make mistakes. So, just basically, the prompt should be simple. Please provide me with a detailed or comprehensive list of inheritance distribution in all different scenarios. And then it'll give you like a comprehensive list. And then copy and paste in another platform in order to fact check it, to make sure that the percentages are actually correct. So we covered the rules of inheritance, and we basically said that ultimately all inheritance laws apply after the payoff of debts and the honoring of wills, right? And so, let's say that I owe $100,000. This has to be deducted from the wealth, and we talked about people who may not even have that much, so they have actually more debt than assets, and we talked about how this needs to be paid off, and we also said that sons and daughters, while they're not religiously responsible to pay off debts of their parents, their parents may actually suffer from punishment in the afterlife if those debts are not paid off. And we also said that you can will up to 1/3 of your properties, of your assets, to a third party or to a masjid or to any charitable cause, as long as you do not will to a natural heir. So you cannot will to your son, you cannot will to your daughter, you cannot will to your wife. Someone that would naturally inherit from you, that person cannot be willed to, or cannot be a recipient of, because this would be like just a way to circumvent the rules, basically. And I also said that in your lifetime, you can allocate your wealth however way you want. You can give all of your wealth to your son or to your daughter, as long as you write it up and you transfer ownership completely to that person. You can do whatever you want in your lifetime. It could be unfair. It could cause issues between the children, and it could cause hatred and problems and conflict, but it is still halal. People have discretion to do that if they wanted to. Yes?
Even if it's not according to the Sharia?
No, it has nothing to do with Sharia, because it's just me giving my property to somebody.
So why is it that the men get more than the women according to Islam?
In in what sense? Were you here last time? Yeah. Yeah. So because again, the man is responsible for financially responsible for a lot more.
I know the reason.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Isn't that according to Islamic law?
Right.
When you distribute inheritance?
Mm-hmm.
So now you're saying if you're alive, you don't need to follow that rule?
No, I'm just saying when you're alive, it's not inheritance. When you're alive, it's just your property. And so,
That rule only applies after you.
yeah, so inheritance only applies after you die. That's when wealth is called inheritance. But in your lifetime, I mean, my kids would not dare question my judgment if I said, I want to give away, I want to donate my house to the masjid. They wouldn't dare question that. They have no right to question that, right? If I know that there's a family member, for example, like I know that all my kids have great careers and they're very successful, whatever, and in my lifetime, remember, I'm still alive, and I wanted to donate most of my wealth to a family of ours or relatives of ours that live, overseas or something like this. I have the right to do that if I wanted to, because it's my property, it's my wealth. After I die, it's not my wealth anymore. It's inheritance, and therefore it needs to be distributed according to Sharia. Now, even when I write a will, it is still inheritance because the distribution happens after, not before my death. You see the distinction? The distinction is death. Whatever I do before death is my right, and whatever that happens after death has to be compatible with Islamic teachings. That I have no right to play with. Yes?
Not sure if I missed it or not, but I think last time, you skipped last Sunday, right? But the predecessors.
We did skip last Sunday.
Yeah. I think there was an open question from somebody here.
About non-Muslims inheriting.
The wife, if it's not
Yes, yes. So, what I said last time is that non-Muslims in general do not inherit from Muslims. And I just said to, I think, whoever asked the question, let me verify if that also applies to the wife, and it does.
okay, the non-Muslim wife
Does not inherit. But because she does not naturally inherit, she is actually in the category where you can include her in the will. So you can include her in the will. So your Muslim wife cannot be included in the will because she is a natural heir. But your non-Muslim wife can be included in the will because she's not a natural heir. And so, if you've lived with someone for 15 years and you figured, hey, this person has been good to me, even though if I died, she does not inherit, she does not get anything, I want to make sure that she gets something from me. And you have to understand also the value of this is that it encourages Muslim men to marry Muslim women. And it discourages non-Muslim women from marrying non-Muslim men. In fact, and a lot of people, they're surprised when they hear this. Muslims are not supposed to inherit from non-Muslims either. Like, it's not just that your non-Muslim relatives don't inherit from you. It's that if you converted to Islam, you're not supposed to be inheriting from your family. I mean, only Ibn Taymiyyah that probably deviated from this rule. But the majority of the scholars of all the madhahib, they are of the opinion that we're not supposed to inherit from our non-Muslim families either. Like, if your father is not Muslim and you converted to Islam, you're not supposed to inherit from them. Like, it's almost like we're supposed to start afresh. We're supposed to start a new chapter, right? Build our own wealth and not depend on wealth that may be tainted with haram. Maybe they've engaged in businesses that we cannot support. And then I live for the rest of my life indebted to my non-Muslim family who gave me that financial success. That is not the right spirit for a Muslim to start their life. So yeah, to answer that question, again, your non-Muslim wife does not inherit from you. Unless, of course, like I said, you write it up in a will and you give her some type of share within the 1/3, as I said before. We also talked about devouring the wealth of orphans last time, and we said that this is considered one of the 7 worst sins in Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ specifically commanded us to do whatever we can to avoid those 7 sins. One of them is taking the wealth of orphans, right? So we are on ayah number 19, inshallah ta'ala, today. And this is where we start the conversation. I'm sorry, I take that back. We're on ayah number 15, because we did not cover the section about inappropriate behavior. All right, so the next section addresses matters of sexual propriety, sexual indecency, immodesty, inappropriate behavior between the genders, flirtatious behavior, things of that nature, right? Everything that is short of actual zina, of actual fornication. The actual act of zina is addressed in Surah Al-Nur, so inshallah when the time comes we will cover that. But this addresses all the other forms of sexual impropriety. You have to understand that the Quran was gradual in the way that it addressed social ills and social diseases and pathologies, right? So, the Quran addresses, in this particular section, addresses sexual impropriety short of actual zina, right? So if you look at ayah number 15, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاللَّاتِي يَأْتِينَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مِن نِسَائِكُمْ فَاسْتَشْهِدُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةً مِنْكُمْ. For those who are guilty of some type of sexual indecency from amongst your women, call to witness against them 4 at least from amongst you. And if they bear witness, then confine them to their houses until either death takes them away or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens a way for them to repent and for things to improve. أَوْ يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ لَهُنَّ سَبِيلًا. There is definitely some disagreement between the scholars about what all this means, right? Some scholars actually say that ayah number 2 in Surah Al-Nur, which details the punishment of zina, abrogates this one. Does naskh. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this term, right? One of the sciences of the Quran is an-nasikh wal-mansukh, the abrogated and the abrogating. And it's the assumption that some verses of the Quran have been abrogated or have been made obsolete by other verses that came later, right? The majority of the scholars subscribe to the doctrine of abrogation. There is also scholars that do not accept this concept, and they believe that every single ayah in the Quran has its validity and it has not been abrogated, and I definitely belong to this camp. But this is the minority camp. And in the interest of academic honesty, I have to tell you that if you reject naskh, if you reject abrogation, you would be in the minority, in not the slim minority, but you will be in the minority for sure, right? Like I cannot accept that there is any ayah in the Quran that has been invalidated yet. We still recite that ayah in our salah, and it's still a source of blessings for us. For me, that does not make sense, right? And so if you follow abrogation, then there's no issue. Then, ayah number 15 in Surah Al-Nisa was abrogated by ayah number 2 of Surah Al-Nur. There's no discussion here. In which case, what you read here, al-fahisha is not sexual indecency, al-fahisha is fornication. And then this ayah is providing some type of a moderate punishment for zina that was later on made severe in Surah Al-Nur, right? Now, if you do not accept abrogation, then you would translate fahisha here differently. That fahisha here is not zina. That fahisha here just means, sexual contact or sexual indecency that is short of actually committing adultery or fornication. And I think that this, in my opinion, it makes a little bit more sense, because if the only punishment in the Quran is confined to the actual crime of fornication that requires the 4 witnesses and the very complicated process, then everything prior is not punishable, because the offense has to be as severe as penetrative sex, which is the one that requires the legal punishment. Which means that everything else, which people can do a million things before getting into that, and that would not make sense. And so this ayah actually makes it where the realm of punishment for sexual indecency goes even beyond, whatever, like I use penetrative sex because this is the crime that requires, the actual penal code. And anything, prior to that seems to be unpunishable, but, again, I don't think that that makes much sense. Remember when we talked, a couple weeks ago about the power of local enforcement, and that, Islamic law assumes the power of local authority and local culture in order to deter crime from happening in the first place, right? We're not waiting for disasters to happen and then use the police and use jail time and so forth, in order to punish people. We would rather that people refrain from committing crime in the first place. And so with that in mind, if boys and girls, teenagers or young people, singles who are not married, if they are allowed to mingle, if they're allowed to, go attend parties, if they're allowed to be in mixed gatherings and engage in inappropriate behavior, and, awrat are being exposed and foulness is being practiced and so forth, and then, again, these sexualized environments that we see today, it may not necessarily go all the way to actually people having sex with each other, but we've seen that it would pretty much cover everything else, right? And so if you live in a society or a community where parents and elders and friends and community and culture, everyone looks so down upon this, and there is consequences to this behavior, then it is more than likely that this behavior is going to be limited. And if you live in a society that encourages this behavior, or at least tolerates this behavior and is perfectly fine with this type of behavior, like, you watch the movies and then, they try to make something out of it that is really empty and hollow, right? So, you have this really real macho guy who has a daughter, and then he's at home, and then, this teenager comes and he knocks on the door, and he says, oh, Mr. So-and-so, who are you? And then, he say, well, I'm so-and-so, and I'm here to take your daughter out on a date. So this man makes it look like he's pretending, to be all protective, of his daughter, and, you better bring her back before 9, and if you cross these lines, I'm gonna give you the piece of my mind and all of that. Again, all just stupidity. You're literally handing over your daughter to a stranger that's going to take her to God knows what. Like, again, the way that the movies are not a reflection of culture. The movies are makers of culture. So don't ever think that what you see in the movie is reflective of what happens in wider society. What you see in the movie is how the makers of those movies want wider society to be like and to behave like, right? And so, which is better? If you're really like a man who is protective of his daughter, which is better? To give your daughter to a stranger who is not family, who is not her husband, in a culture that glorifies physical contact between men and women, right? But then require them to follow some boundaries and hope for the best, or not send your daughter with him in the first place. And so, again, this is the context of this surah, is that it's basically saying, if despite all the measures and despite all the boundaries and despite everything that we try to do, and then our sons and daughters are still crossing those lines, then they need to receive some punishment. But here's the thing, because we also don't want to create a situation where there's hearsay and there's people, accusing others, unduly and so forth. It still says, فَاسْتَشْهِدُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةً مِنْكُمْ. Make sure that you can get 4 independent testimonies that, oh my God, so-and-so was seen at that place with this guy, and, she was sitting on his lap, or something like this. Like of course, if zina is being committed, there's a very different process, to prosecute this. This is a completely different process. But again, if we're just talking about sexual impropriety or indecency, and they've been seen, and these are four people that are witnessing this, and they have all corroborated each other's testimony, then basically it says, فَأَمْسِكُهُنَّ فِي الْبُيُوتِ. See the threat from the Quran. فَأَمْسِكُهُنَّ فِي الْبُيُوتِ. Confine them to their homes. And in order to scare them so badly, it says, حَتَّى يَتَوَفَّهُنَّ الْمَوْتِ, until they die. I mean, a girl could be like 16. And then she's like, you know what? You're stuck at home until you leave this world. Because this assumes that we're talking about younger people. And younger people will be scared and deterred when they hear something like this. But then the disclaimer or the caveat comes a little bit right after, and it says, أَوْ يَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ لَهُنَّ سَبِيلًا. Or maybe Allah will open a door or a path for them. Essentially saying what? If you don't mind your behavior, you're not leaving this house. But if you improve your behavior, then maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open some doors for you. Things improve, the person repents, makes tawbah, and so on and so forth, and then we're able to say, okay, we can trust you again. Again, all of this requires what? Requires a very strong family structure, requires a very strong culture, requires people that are very careful. And so we have to be honest with one another, and we have to be very careful in what we're supposed to be doing, right?
Something I wanted to kind of ask, it's kind of a complicated question. I don't know how to frame it correctly, but like within people that I know myself, part of a very, per se, religious family members, unfortunately, we all live like a non-Muslim country,
Mm.
this cultural influences are very strong. So I personally do know families where the parents do claim to be Muslim, somewhat practical, some are not. Like in the open, in the public ceremonies, the family events, I have personally attended as well.
Right.
These parents are sitting there with their sons, officially with an invitation from the host, with their girlfriend.
Right.
In the same event. There's no nikah, there's no nothing. And they just like hanging out, and those parents, those uncles, those aunties, those grandfathers, grandmothers, sitting in the same room with their hijabs on, and nobody in the room dares to question that. And when I have spoken to that, I have been looked down as the guy who's not open-minded and the guy that doesn't understand the rules.
You're Sheikh here.
So,
Sheikh
I'm
Zabihullah.
the sheikh now.
You're the Sheikh of the family now.
You literally owe me like 25 cents there. I'm not even your sheikh. What are you guys talking about? Like, this is not acceptable. And this guy literally gets an event invitation with him and his girlfriend Jane because it's a social, it's a cultural thing.
I mean, you think this is bad? You think this is bad? Well, let me tell you a story. There is a particular family in the community that I have had to counsel because they all turned against each other. The family basically is divided into two camps. One camp is supportive and the other camp rejects that their daughter married another woman. Like there is a disagreement in the family about the tolerance of this behavior. And I am just mind-boggled. Like, guys, why are there people in the family that are even okay with this in the first place? How is that even possible? And then, you keep hearing the excuses. Well, if we're not involved, if we're not being supportive, she's just going to disappear from our lives and she's going to do her thing and she's going to be away from the family. And it's like, what message are you sending to the rest of the kids in the family? Deterrence, the power of deterrence, like I said earlier, that is the most important guideline that we have to prevent crime from happening. If we're being tolerant with things that are un-Islamic in our own families, not only that we're encouraging the person that does those things, we're encouraging others to do the same. We're encouraging other kids because they see, well, our elders were okay with her doing this. They're going to be okay with me doing much lesser things. Like, what's the big deal? She married another woman and they were okay with it. I can definitely have a boyfriend. Like, what's the big deal? You see how this psychology works? It's absolutely horrific. And so I don't think that you should waste your time or bother yourself too much about what the big family does, But you start your own values, your own culture, your own principle in your own nuclear family, and whoever else in the extended family that supports that. So spend more time building up that culture and spend less time fighting them. I don't think that that's, you're not going to go anywhere. But you need, if you are known in the family as the guy that is most rigid when it comes to these boundaries, you wear that with pride. Because there has to be someone that carries those principles and lives those principles. It's not us being mean and rude and exclusive, by the way. It's us just trying to defend the values of God. We didn't make the rules. We may or may not like the rules, by the way. I don't need to like the rules. I just need to follow them. And the rules come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you come to a point where you also like the rules, that's great. Your faith is very strong. But I don't need to like everything that I follow, but I still have to follow it nonetheless. And so, trust me, I see a lot worse things, in the community. I'm talking about Muslim families. I'm talking about Muslim families, right? I'm talking about families where the daughter becomes a man and then marries a woman. Sometimes, it's a bit of a twist, but you have to focus in order to understand what's going on exactly. Yes, you do. You really do, because the roles, would be completely reversed. Or I have also seen, and this will shock you, I have seen a woman that presumably became a man and then had a gay relationship with another man. So in her mind, we're two men together, when in reality, she's just a woman that is with a man. But here, there's no room for logic in any of this. There's no room for rationality in any of this. So what are we supposed to do? Just be okay with this? Right? And so the ayah tells you, when you start sensing, sexual impropriety, when you start sensing, inappropriate behavior, sometimes confining people to the home, is the initial first step, that may wake them up and make them realize that, the cost is going to be huge. You feel however way you want to feel. That's fine. We're not telling you feel differently. We're just asking you to do what? To act differently. Because that's usually the argument that they use. This is how I feel inside. This is who I am. I'm not doubting that. It's fine. You can feel however you want to feel inside. I just don't want to see a single trace of that on your behavior. I am not supposed to just be, what does it mean really, I just be who you are, or you do you, and all this stuff that you hear, right? That we're supposed to constantly do mujahada. We're supposed to constantly strive to become better, to suppress our weak and animal impulses. We're supposed to suppress our weaknesses, right? We're supposed to try and be stronger, right? If you're a jerk, are you supposed to act like a jerk all the time? If you're greedy, are you supposed to act greedy all the time? If you have temper issues, are we all just supposed to tolerate your anger issues every single minute of the day? You're supposed to be a responsible adult, right? The way you feel inside doesn't always have to show on your face. Right? My wife had this rule with the kids, right? When they act up, and then she holds them to account. So they say, well, Mom, I'm very angry. I'm very upset. And then she's like, I don't mind. You can be angry if you want. But walk into the backyard and face the fence and then scream your lungs out. You don't take your anger out on the family. You don't use your anger as an excuse to drop your duties and your responsibilities and to act irresponsibly and to be mean and rude at home. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. You're angry, it's fine. You can keep your anger to yourself. Because again, it is always used as an excuse, right? It's just, I am just being, what's the word that they use? I am being authentic. I am just being authentic. No, I don't want to see your authenticity, right? Keep your authenticity to yourself, right? And so family works together in order to kind of nip this in the bud at a very early stage, right? You see this type of behavior, and again, no sleeping outside the house, right? No slumber parties, right? No sleepovers. no camps where they, even with school, we've never allowed our kids to do any of that. None. None. You don't allow the kids to do those things and then complain later of relationships and this and that and halal and haram. Why? Right? You want to go on a day trip? Fine. And I need to know who's going with you. And I need their names and the names of their parents and their phone numbers. And I need to look at their Instagram accounts. I need to know what kinds of people they are. Right? And so this is, again, us confining our children to the home if we are sensing inappropriate behavior. Because this can really resolve most of your problems at an early stage. All right? And then it says, أَوْ يَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ لَهُنَّ سَبِيلًا. Maybe Allah will open the door for them. In other words, you repent, you manage your behavior, you mind yourself, you scale back on this type of action, then maybe we can have another conversation about it. It's almost that the ayah is talking about the modern word of grounding people. You're grounded for life. We even use that word today, right? Like with teenagers, you're grounded for life. I know people in the community that grounded their kids, like one full school year. Grounded. The cops the school reported it to the police. The police came to the house. I'm just here to check, on your so-and-so, your son, your daughter, whatever. No, they're here. Come, meet the officer. Is everything okay? Yeah, it's just they're homeschooled. Right? Sometimes you have to take drastic measures. And then when the kids improve over time, you let them out back into society, right?
And what if they don't listen and they move out of the house because you
That's fine. That's fine. You want to walk into the fire and you want to go out there into the world. Again, I will never kick my kids outside the house. That's really important though. And I have to state that. I cannot willingly hand over my flesh and blood to the wolves. I'm not going to do that. So I will always do my utmost effort and my utmost capacity to work with them as long as we still have a dialogue. And by the way, as a parent, you also have to be intelligent because it's not just about punishment and consequences. It's also about the carrot. It's not just about the stick. It's also about the carrot. It's about them understanding what they stand to lose. There is this concept of, what do you call it, trust fund babies. Have you ever heard of the trust fund babies? These are mostly like wealthier families like on the East Coast who have this generational wealth. So they will create these living trusts. And their kids are attached to the trust because, they get like a salary every month. But that salary comes with a long list of requirements. If you do drugs, you don't get any money, right? If you do like a DIY or whatever, DUI, if you drive under the influence and you get arrested, you get no money. If you marry someone without the blessings of the family, you get no money. Like literally long lists that are written up in the living trusts. In order to do what? In order to keep the kids connected, in order to keep the kids at bay, in order to keep the kids thinking, I have so much to lose here. I really need to honor the culture of my family. Until they are 24, 25, 26 years of age, now they're stable. And then they're thankful. And they will come to you and say, oh, thank God that you've been so strict with us. And kids who had very loose parents, they will blame the parents later on. They will say, you did not do your job to be strict with me. Because a lot of parents think that their job is to be clowns and to be monkeys for their children. That their job is to please the children and to make their children laugh. No. Your job is to be the most hated person in the world. Your job is to be the source of anger for your children because no one else is going to do it except you. That's your responsibility. You are the levee that stands between them and full destruction. So you do your job. You don't have to be popular. You don't have to be liked by the children. You just have to do your job. And then at some point they will realize that and they will thank you for it, right? So yeah, I want to go back to that, because that's a really important point. And so, like I said, I will never kick them out, okay? But I will not bend my rules in order to keep them either. Like I will never kick them out willingly, but I'm not going to compromise my own rules just to accommodate them, right? Why? This is so important. Because we have other kids too. You know, we have nieces, we have nephews. There are other kids in the family. You know, just if I bend the rules for one of them, you know, then I'm basically breaking the rules for everyone else. And the rules mean nothing at this point, all right? And so I have to be very intelligent about the rules. I cannot be extreme. I cannot be hasty. I cannot be rash. You know, I cannot be emotional. I need to be methodical. I need to really be very focused and intelligent about my rules. But once I have decided what those rules are, you better be ready to apply them. And again, rules are happening in conjunction with a lot of incentives too. Like you can't just be laying down the law every single day, but you know, they never see you smile, they never see you laugh, they never see you like showing compassion and showing love and taking them on vacations and stuff like that. You have to be balanced so that they're able to think, well, yeah, we don't like dad's tough side, but we love it when dad is being like, you know, all nice. I want more of that and less of this. So maybe I don't need to trigger dad, and I don't want to lose my family. Because if I leave the house, what am I going to do? I'm going to be out there in the world. I have to make my own income. I have to come up with at least $2,500 in order to pay rent. I need to find transportation. I need to be able to eat and have insurance. I need at least $5,000 to $6,000 a month in California in order to live on my own. How the heck am I going to do that? You know what? Let me just manage my behavior a little bit because I want to stay with the family. Now, if it comes down to it, and despite all of that, one of your kids chose to be out on the streets, that could happen. And may Allah protect us. But if it did happen, then that is Allah's will, and they need to be out there, they need to suffer a little bit in the world, and trust me, 9 times out of 10, they'll figure it out and they'll come back. They will just learn the hard way. And they will be struggling for a while, and I will always keep my door open. You want to come home at any time and apologize and say, Dad, I was wrong. Please take me back in. No questions asked. You're my kid. I love you. That's never going to change, right? And it's not. We're not going to talk about it again. But you have to acknowledge the rules, and you have to subscribe and submit to those rules, right? And I think they will come back. And so if they insist on leaving because they don't like the rules, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm not going to change the rules for them. You know, I've seen parents who allowed their daughters to be with a boyfriend, who allowed their daughters to get pregnant, and now they have a grandchild out of wedlock. And then the mother keeps saying, well, what am I going to do? You know, it's just, she was going to do it anyway. So she's allowing the daughter and the grandkid to live with her in the house. And now, of course, you know, this boyfriend of hers is gone. Is gone. And then she recycles those guys because mom and dad said it was okay. So she'll stay with a guy for 6 months and then leave him and stay with another guy for 6 months. And then, you know, she disappears for 3 weeks, and then she comes home whenever she wants to. That's unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. You cannot do that. You're harming them if you allow this. You're absolutely harming them. You're actually preventing them from repenting, from making tawbah, from coming back to the deen when you act like this. Because you're normalizing the situation, and we cannot do that, right? Now, if you look at ayah number 16, the conversation continues, right? Now, if confining them to the house did not work, and they did it again. Now I want you to pay attention here. In the first one, it says, min nisaikum, from amongst the females. But in this ayah, it says, وَالَّذَانِ يَأْتِيَانِهَا مِنْكُمْ. And for both boys and girls, when they engage in this type of sexual indecency, that is when, and the behavior continues, if they're guilty of this indecency, give them both some form of punishment, right? فَآذُوهُمَا. Now, this is not just about the passive confinement at home. There needs to be some pinch. There needs to be some cost. There needs to be like a big family meeting where all the elders are brought in and then we sit them down under the spotlight like they're accused of a crime, and then we have a family conversation about it and air it out to the family and use the power of shaming in order to get them to manage their behavior, right? Or take possessions out of them, or take money out of them, or deprive them of something that they absolutely want, right? So I need to now engage in punitive behavior, and not just the passive confinement to the house. Now there has to be some consequence, to their behavior. But then it also says, فَإِن تَابَ وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَعْرِضُ عَنْهُمَا. If they repented, and if they, basically went back to the proper path, then kind of leave them alone. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that accepts repentance. Any questions about that? Yes.
It's not only physical confinement now because there is spiritual confinement. When you cut off the TV.
Take their phones, please. Take their phones, change the Wi-Fi password. Take their devices. Oh, I agree. That's a great point. That's a great point, because they can still be connected with the world, even if they're sitting in their bedroom. You don't want that. That would achieve nothing. Yeah. So you definitely want to take their devices as well.
I've seen situations where a kid is 18, 19 years old. You take everything from them, they don't care. They'll move in with some friend, they'll do some odd jobs, and they'll still work their things out because they want their freedom. And they don't want their freedom to be taken away from them. That's the issue.
Right. So are you saying that they will just leave the house and they would leave the house? Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're 19, you don't have a college degree, you have no discernible talents, right? What are you going to do at the age of 19? You're going to work like the McDonald's? You're going to let them get a taste of that in the real world. Let them get a taste of that. Let them see how it is out there. Dog eats dog. Let them deal with that for a while until they come to you with their tail between their legs and say, "Dad, please forgive me." Yeah, it's fine. And again, we're not doing this. We're going to be sad if this happened as parents. Like, I'm not going to be sitting there gloating, "Oh, serves you right." Like, I will be very sad for my children, because I don't want my children to suffer. I don't want them to experience the terrible negativity of the world. I would rather that none of this happens. And so my heart will be bleeding and I will be crying, but I will still insist on following my rules. You have to be strong.
And
Right?
also, in order for them to become like problem solvers, if they are not exposed to the world, they will never learn how to be a problem solver. They have to suffer a little bit, like we did, like our parents did. So that we have some. It's hard. It's really hard.
Hopefully suffer in a controlled fashion. One of the things that we did, for example, is that we never had a landscape guy. We always did our own yard. I never had a pool guy. I mean, occasionally, maybe once a year, I would get a pool guy to do like, the weathering or whatever. They have to add chemicals. Like this, sometimes like once a year you have to add chemicals or do maintenance to the pump or something like this. But most of the time, I manage my own pool and we manage our own yard, right? Because the kids have to, especially the boys, when it comes to like, stuff that you do with your own hands. The kids had to do these things. And so it's a common thing. It's a no-brainer for us, that we have to cut the grass, we have to trim the bushes, we have, and we have, all kinds of tools in order to do that. Because it's not just about the lawnmower, it's about a whole bunch of other things, because you want to maintain the yard, and it needs to continue to look nice, and so on and so forth, and watering issues, and what do you call it, a sprinkler head is broken, so we have to go to Home Depot and fix it, and so on and so forth. And anything that breaks around the house, we always have to attempt to fix it ourselves at least. It's funny, because I was literally, like yesterday, I was literally asking my wife if chlorine can be manufactured at home in the garage, right? Because you have to pay like whatever $11 for 2 gallons in order to maintain your own pool. I was like, can we make this at home? So she actually goes online, and then it says, you cannot safely produce chlorine at home. It needs to be synthesized in factories and stuff like that. I was like, shucks. If it can be made at home, I would have made it at home, right? Because it's like, whatever, 95% water, and then, 5% sodium hypochlorine, whatever you call it. It's like, salt is sodium chloride, NaCl. I think chlorine is NaOCl or something like this. So there's an oxygen atom that is added to the molecule. I figured I can add the oxygen, but it turns out that it's a very complicated chemical process. The point is that you always want to attempt to do things at home and keep the kids busy. And so if they're sitting in their rooms and they're on their tablets, on their phones, or watching TV or playing video games, all day long, what kind of confinement is this? This is heaven. But if you keep them at home, you better find work for them, that they're constantly busy doing work. And this is also, by the way, reflective of our lifestyles in general. If your lifestyle is based in luxury, if your lifestyle is based in comfort, is based in using money to buy comfort in life, using money to buy more devices, using money to buy more things at home, using money to buy all kinds of useless things, and your garage is filled with those things, then if you need to confine your children or ground them, what kind of task are you going to give them? There's nothing. Because as a parent, you've created a culture where I'm just going to buy everything with money. I'm going to buy my way through anything in life. So when you ask them, I think if one of you guys can open that door, I think it's locked for some reason. I don't know why. I'm sorry, yes. And there was a question there as well.
I think I have a comment and a question at the end, possibly. So when you started this surah, Surah Al-Nisa initially, you framed this journey in terms of enforcement, setting up rules, and how the Western society says, here are the rules, you break them, here's what you're going to get in terms of punishment. And Islamic society is about individual obligation, family, people, holding people accountable. And I think when you're describing, the scenario in terms of somebody, a young person is stepping out of the rules of the Islamic requirements, you're kind of enforcing punishment, in a sense, right, to correct that behavior. How do you frame something like this from the perspective of them understanding their individual obligation so that they feel it and they understand it and own it as a behavior that they've got to be held accountable for, versus a parent enforcing a rule that is given through divine?
I mean, that's a great question, and I would say that prior to enforcing the rules, you need to have communicated those rules over the years. And that becomes part of your family culture. I'll speak for our own family. Our family has a mission and a vision statement. And we actually have it written up. It's on the fridge. Ever since the kids were little, right? Responsibilities to God, responsibilities to family, responsibilities to self, responsibilities to the community, and so forth. You have to constantly articulate your own family culture and your own family standards, to the children over the years, right? So this can't just come out of the blue, right? And now that you've been communicating that over the years, when the violation takes place, I think it would make sense for them to deal with the consequences. Because it's not like I'm just silent. It's like Western society does. We're silent. We do absolutely nothing. But if you break the rules, I'm going to put you in jail, right? Like a lot of people don't even know the laws. And so that's the first step that you have to, there has to be a declaration of that family culture at home that is happening over the years. Number two, when the time comes and you have to enforce those rules, now they have to understand why there is a consequence. This is not just because mom says so. No. This is why you are dealing with this. They may not understand. They may not be convinced, but you're going to articulate it anyway, right? And then you are constantly checking that behavior. You're helping them. You're involved with them. You're not just sitting there waiting to see, if they've done their jobs or not. Let me give you a hand. Let's do this together, right? So that you are encouraging them to do the right thing. And also, you are waiting for any sign of improvement, and then you reward that improvement. exaggerate or excessively reward the improvement, right? Oh, you're allowed 1 hour a day to be outside the house. I'll give you 2 hours. I'll give you 3 hours, right? And so you're constantly monitoring in order to, to get the kids to understand where they are and where they need to be. And you're using the reward and punishment, feedback mechanism in order to reinforce positive behavior, right? Yes?
Well, you pretty much answered everything I was going to say. I think everything stems from home, especially with children's behavior. The mistakes a lot of us make, a lot of times, especially Muslim, they emphasize being Muslim and Islamic. I mean, there are a lot of people that I've seen that, like you said, very religious. The way they dress and speak is their daily lives. You see them, and then you see the children are complete opposites of a father who tries really hard to be the best that he could be, and then the son is a complete shaitan almost, or deceitful people with the lid. But again, it goes back to knowing the fundamentals of a religion, right?
Right.
Being truthful, being honest, being accountable. You can't say, Wallahi, I swear to God, and then lie and make up stuff, talk about people, gossip, all of those things when you come from a Muslim family, right? And you come from a practicing Muslim family, why is your child like that? So I hold the parents accountable because their words and their actions do not match. When your words and actions do not match, that is seen in your children because your children is your byproduct.
Right.
Okay? So your children is by your product. So you cannot say that I'm this virtuous person, but I produce this.
I agree with you 100%.
And then you can't dump them in a masjid or somewhere and say, hey,
Yeah, hoping that they'll do it for you.
yeah, they'll do it for you. Fix my child, educate them in Islam, teach them the fundamentals that I'm paying you.
Mm-hmm.
That's complete waste of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Through the line here, nobody really cares.
Which, by the way, has become very common in our community. I call this anxious, guilty parenting, right? So a lot of these anxious/guilty parents, they're not doing any parents, but they think because they make money and they have a lot of residual income, they think that by putting the kids in a million different programs, that is what's gonna help them.
Incentive by the Western culture.
Yes.
To
Yeah.
eliminate you having more than one
Yeah,
child.
absolutely.
It's so expensive.
Mm.
And then what happens, I've seen a lot of parents concentrate on one child through soccer or whatever. There's 3 other children that are completely detached from the family because the parents are kind of concentrating in that one child to the games, making him a star or her, and the 3 kids are left at home and everything. That's dividing the family.
Exactly.
Dividing finance. So that's all makeup.
But now it's not just about soccer, right? Or piano classes. It's also about religious learning. So they'll sign up with the sheikh from overseas to teach them the Quran. They'll sign up with the Arab guy from Syria to teach them the Arabic language. They'll sign up for the Zoom classes. They will put them in this program and in that program, and they'll pay for all of this. And the one thing that's missing in all of this is what? Is your role as a parent. All of this is supposed to be supplementary to the effort that you're already putting at home and the constant daily conversations and the values that you personally follow and adhere to as a parent.
Correct. Those constant daily conversations are not happening. That's why the children are different than the values that the parents want.
But I have to say, though, that despite our best effort, is it possible, like we've followed every instruction in the book, but is it possible in the end that one of your kids just does not have the hidayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's still possible, right? Hmm? Exactly. Yeah. Nuh alayhi salam tried everything. And it's just one of his kids. Most of them were okay. All of them were okay except one. And so, and that's why I still try to be humble and I still try to be understanding and forgiving when I see some parents who have like this one kid who is completely off. Because I keep saying to myself, maybe they've tried and it just didn't work. I know that you can see the signs of bad parenting all over them, but sometimes you still say to yourself, well, inshallah, who am I to judge? I'm not going to judge them. because maybe they tried and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not will for this particular child to be, to be on the path. And so I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just and He's fair, and our efforts will always translate, inshallah, into blessings with our children. But there's always that slight possibility that despite your best effort, one of them is just going to be off. So, yes?
Thank you. I have a question relating to business. So, my apologies. In my opinion, this statement only applies if you have an intact nuclear family, meaning mom and a dad, and maybe some other relatives around, like extended family. Because as a single mom, your child, a boy, without any extended family or a dad or any relatives or siblings of my own to give influence, to attempt to provide all of that guidance and education is impossible. No, I'm not going to pause. Please. It's impossible. So we have to rely as single moms on the masjid or the education system to provide a core part of that education, because we are only one person, right? And the society doesn't give us the time to act in that way. It's just, it's not the way that you speak, it works only in a certain circumstance. So maybe the people who are relying more on the masjid, they just don't have it at home.
No, but I don't think that sister was saying don't rely on the masjid. Yeah.
So I never said that, number one. I understand your concern being a single mother and the challenges that come with that. But I don't think you were his first teacher, his first love, and his guiding light in his life forever, regardless of his age. No one has more influence on your child than you do. So my husband works full time. He's not there with the children. I am. A mother's, you are the most greatest influence in his life than anyone else. So don't think that you need uncles or extended family to raise him. Of course, it's great to have that.
You do, because you need a masculine identity attached to a masculine child. And if they do not have a male influence or role model to teach them to be a man, a woman cannot teach a man to be a man at the end of the day. A man can teach a man. A man has to take a boy to the masjid and teach him how to perform salah.
Yeah, we're not denying that, sister. I think it's
That never came out. I didn't define the rules that way. But that's your opinion. You're entitled to it completely, and I'm entitled to mine.
As I see the system here, it's more difficult. Like as a single mom in a Muslim country, it was very easy to get that support, and it was given freely, right? But here, where there's more autonomy and individuality, even inside of the faith, it can be more challenging.
well. Let's refocus, guys. So again, we need our masjid, we need our community, we need the culture that comes with all of this, because that is the framework under which we all operate as a community, and it makes. We want our kids to avoid bad behavior, not just because mom and dad are going to be upset, but also because they're going to lose friends in the community, they're going to lose uncles, they're going to lose elders. The imam is going to think ill of me. That is all very, very healthy. I think the point that we're saying earlier is that the community cannot be an alternative. It can only be a supplement, but it cannot be an alternative to what is already happening at home. So even as a single mother, you're still playing a tremendous role in raising your own child at home. And then we are here to help with the things that you cannot provide, obviously. And that's why I constantly emphasize the importance of mentorship. Boys need to be with older mentors that will help them manage the real life issues and challenges that they will face in life that mom and dad are not going to talk to them about. They need someone from the community to teach them the details of the deen. They need someone to teach them public speaking. They need someone to teach them, to teach them karate. They need someone to teach them how to play soccer. There are certain specialized skills that obviously not every parent is going to be able to provide. But again, the parents, I think that's the unit that manages all of this, right? And so I think that's enough conversation about this, and I want to get into ayah number 19 because we need to talk about prohibitions when it comes to marriage, right? And so we covered a lot about the rules and guidance and injunctions about women. We talked about marriage, we talked about inheritance, we talked about polygamy, whatever it is. This is a section basically that talks about the people that we can and the people that we cannot marry. And this is also part and parcel of the protections of those rights of women enshrined in Sharia. In pre-Islamic times, women were treated as a property. They were treated as literally as something that does not have a will of her own. When the husband died, the woman did not have a choice as to what she's supposed to do with the next step of her life. She's not entitled to any type of inheritance. She cannot lead her own path. The family of her late husband will basically decide what happens to her. If one of her husband's brothers likes her, he can literally claim her as his own. And some of them, they would actually keep that woman at home until one of their sons grows older in order to marry her, so that we keep the money in the family, kind of thing. And so, and that became especially problematic when it comes to basically men marrying the wife of their fathers, right? And so let's say that the father was married to 2 or 3 women, and then the father died. One of those women is your mother, right? But then he was also married to 2 other women, and none of your uncles claimed any of those women, right? And so, but they still want the money to stay in the family, so they will come to you and they will say, hey, when you come of age, you're gonna marry your stepmother. No, I don't know. Would that be considered stepmother? I suppose, right? I mean, she was technically your father's wife, your father's second wife, your father's third wife, whatever. But when your father died, men actually married their stepmothers. And a woman that is supposed to be seen as a mother is now a contender for marriage, which was extremely problematic in almost every sense. Like, you're not supposed to marry someone that you're supposed to see as your mom, right? Number 2, if you had children with her, then those children are what? Like, those children are siblings, but then those children are also like, your kids. It was a big mess, and it actually used to happen quite a bit, in pre-Islamic times. They used to call the child that comes out of this. So you have the child that comes out of wedlock, the bastard child, right? And then there is the child that comes from those relationships where the son marries the second wife or the third wife of his own father after his father died. They used to call him al-maqit, the hated child, because that child, imagine, that's your identity for the rest of your life. But the Arabs, again, were very keen about keeping the money in the family, so they would allow for these violations to take place. So ayah number 19.
Was this always about the money, or was there some kind of
Money, pride, honor. Maybe she's like, sometimes the father married a girl that was 22 years old, right? And then died a year later, so she's still young, she's pretty, whatever, she comes from a great family, so she becomes sort of like a prized bride, if you will. So they would wait in order to marry her. So yeah, no, it wasn't just about money. So so before we get to marrying your God forbid, your stepmother, right? Number 1, like I said before, women are not property to be inherited. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يحل لكم أن ترثوا النساء كرها. It is not lawful for you to take women as an inheritance, right? ولا تعضلوهن لتذهبوا ببعض ما آتيتموهن. And do not hold them against their will in those families in order to get something from them that you would have otherwise not been able to get, right? I.e. their wealth, right? or their access or their connections or whatever, right? And so all of these things are now made haram. If your husband passed away, you have your iddah period, and you need to decide on what to do with the next phase of your life. You have nothing to do with your husband's family at this point. You just need to consult with your wakil, your dad if he's still alive. The Hanafis even say a woman that was married before, تكون وكيلة نفسها. She can be her own wakil, if she wanted to. And a new type of freedom was given to women to decide. And by the way, you guys may think that this is not such a big deal, but for the Arabs, this was absolutely life-changing. Because her husband dies, she is really imprisoned for the rest of her life. She can't do anything. Her family has absolutely no say. It's her late husband's family that decides. But now that the rules were completely reversed, she has complete control over her own destiny. After her iddah period, she can basically decide who she wants to marry, what she wants to do. She can now legitimately inherit, right? The percentage was, 1/6 or 1/2 or 1/6 or 1/8, whatever, but she still inherits from her husband, which again was unheard of before. She's now entitled to alimony. She's entitled to child support if she still has, children that she's raising. The equation changed both socially and economically for those women, completely. And then it says, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, right? If you are married to those women, live with them and treat them with kindness, right? فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُهُنَّ. Now, if you hate something about your wife, فَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Sometimes you hate something, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts so much good in that thing, right? If you have an issue with your spouse, it may be that you dislike a thing, while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed abundant good in it. Okay? And so we're being careful here. The Quran is being careful. While we're giving women their full freedom and the agency to choose their next step, we're also not taking family relations lightly. We're saying if you are in a relationship, if you're married, love cannot be the only criterion upon which staying in a marriage or having a divorce hinges. And that really opens up a very important conversation, because this is what I hear today all the time. Sister, why are you breaking your family? Why are you having a divorce? I don't love him anymore. Okay, I don't even know what that means. Like, the way we feel about someone or something actually changes every day. Like, if your husband went on for 6 months and he's being absolutely kind to you, you're going to love him a little bit more. And if he's being mean and rude, you're going to dislike him a lot. We can't even make those assessments sometimes on our own. That's why we need our elders. That's why we need the community. That's why we need culture. That's why we need custom. That's why we need the local enforcement, the local authority, right? I have, alhamdulillah, I can take credit for as any imam would, I think, not just me, but any imam would take credit in saving many, many marriages. Why? Because just the fact that a couple feels that they can go talk to the imam and say, we've been having a very difficult marriage and we need to have a divorce, without going to the courts and filing for divorce right away, is in of itself a very important checkpoint. Why? Exactly. Even though they have the choice to go and dissolve the marriage on their own, why do they come to me? Because they need what? They need guidance. It's almost like they're not 100% sure that the decision they're making is the right decision. So therefore, I need to go get an additional pair of eyes in order to either validate or invalidate, hopefully validate, but maybe invalidate what I'm already trying to do. Right? So my job as the imam is to do it, is to act like the county, the court, and say, okay, Bismillah, what's your name? What's your name? Let's write it up. Done. You guys are divorced? Is that my job? What's my job? My job is to at least attempt to save the marriage. is to at least attempt to make sure that there are good reasons for which they are leaving each other. Because again, I don't want her to suffer either. I don't want him to suffer. Like if life between them is absolutely impossible, I mean, divorce is permissible. It's not the end of the world. But before we even get there, I want to make sure that the reasons for which they want to leave each other are actually legitimate reasons. And it cannot be something phony. So when a sister, sometimes even a brother, he'd be like, I fell out of love. What does that mean, you fell out of love? You know, a man wanted to divorce his wife, and he goes to Umar radiallahu anhu. And Umar asked him, why do you want to divorce her? You know, is she ugly? He says, no, she's beautiful. Did she give you children? He says, yes, she gave me children. Does she treat you well? Yes. Does she cook for you? Yes. Did she raise her voice? No. So why do you want to divorce your wife? So he says, I don't love her anymore. To Umar radiallahu anh. So what does Umar say? He says, أَلَا تُبْنَى الْبُيُوتِ عَلَى الْحُبِّ. Are you saying that love is the only criteria upon which homes are built? That's not the only one. It's important, but it's not the only one. So I always tell couples when they come to me, you know, brothers or sisters, you know, husbands or wives, I always tell them, okay, you know, so you don't like this one thing about your spouse, right? I don't love him anymore. Of course, if that person does drugs or, you know, commits infidelity or like there are serious things, I always recommend that they leave each other. Especially, I tell my sisters, like if a brother comes to me and says, my wife cheated on me, I'll say, dude, walk out of this thing, like run as fast as you can. Because the type of illness in someone's heart, right? That she would cheat on her husband and commit infidelity with a colleague at work, for me, that's absolutely sick, right? So just, for me, again, that's my preference. I don't think that infidelity can be forgiven because there will always be that thing, you know, in the back of your mind that will always make you doubt the other person, right? If that person, you know, beats you up and puts you on the brink of death, it will likely happen again, right? There are situations where I say, you gotta walk, okay? But 95% of the time, it's not any of those situations, right? It's arguments, you know, it's him spending way too much time away from the house, problems with the in-laws. My mother-in-law interferes in many things. You know, we need more money and he's not spending. I don't understand his finances. You know, he has temper issues. Oh, she's falling behind in her obligations. We've fallen out of love. So I always sit down and I remind them, okay? Love is important, sure, okay? What about stability? Is that important? What about children? The kids that you guys have together, is that important? What about the financials? The state of California is going to crush you if you attempt to have a divorce, right? Does that matter? What about your standing in the community and in the family? What about loneliness? What about isolation? What about you are 47 and it's not going to be very easy for you to find a companion, okay? And people do change and evolve over time. You want to examine all of the factors. Don't just take one thing or two things and say, it's because of those two things that I'm going to have a divorce. You want to look at the entire thing. Now, of course, if you dislike someone so much that you wake up in the morning, you look at your spouse, A'udhu billah. Like if it's that bad, maybe you need to get out of this relationship, right? Like if it's that bad, right? Most of the time, it's complicated factors coming in together. There's good memories and there's bad memories. There's good days, there are bad days. You know, there's happy moments and there's sad moments. It's complicated. And that's my job, you know, as the imam, that's our job as a society, as a masjid, as a community, as elders, is to hold them accountable and to make them see the things that they are not able to see, right? And make sure that we go through this, and it takes its time. You know, I always say, 6 months to a year. That's usually my, sort of like cycle for counseling. And if 6 months have passed and both husband and wife see the same thing that they saw on day one, which is we cannot live together, then khalas. Maybe it's better for you guys to move on. But we have to verify that first. And so, yes, sister.
I had a question about the right to talk about the widow's given. Talk about if the husband dies, the widow can decide what to do, right? Out of curiosity, is that honored in most Muslim countries? Because in my lifetime, I've not seen it enforced in that manner.
In the Middle East, it's honored.
Legally, it's not, or
No, legally. Yeah, because family law in most Middle Eastern countries directly follows Sharia. It follows Hanafi and Shafi'i madhabs, right? But then, there's also like areas like maybe Bedouin areas, maybe parts of Afghanistan, areas where people have very strong local cultures. Women get nothing. They don't get inheritance. They don't get, in clear, blatant violation of Islamic law.
and it's the scenario where there's an individual, like a woman, that is dealing with a circumstance, but the decisions are made by the male in the family and the men in the government, and nobody really comes and says, Islamically, someone has the right to decide, right? Nobody really comes and speaks up for her. So again, it's just, it sounds very nice the way you describe it, but I've just never seen it.
No, I mean, again, if you talk about the Middle East, which I think is what I'm familiar with,
Yeah.
Arab women are very, very strong and opinionated. They're not gonna,
So are Afghans.
they're not. Yes and no, right? Like we've also seen, all kinds of rules and laws that have been very suppressive to women, in Afghanistan, especially in the last 75 years or so. Like you see, some, before before the king or during the time of the king in Afghanistan, it was a completely different society, and then the Soviet invasion comes, and then society kind of goes back to the very conservative holding on to the past, kind of thing in order to protect itself against foreign invasion, right? So there has been like a massive receding, I think, of those freedoms in Afghani society. And I'm not saying that this is confined to Afghanistan. This happened in many Muslim countries, by the way. And then, the Mujahideen came, and then the Taliban came, and the Taliban probably did not make the situation much better. And now I think we are at the cusp of seeing some loosening of that grip. I think that is going to start happening.
Outside cultural influences too. If you look at, you said before Taliban, there's a lot of the Arab influences that came into Afghanistan. Then with the Taliban, a lot of the Pakistani influences came with the militia and the military schools of work. Because if you look at the history of Afghanistan prior to, like you said, the Russians came in Afghanistan were just like any other society where women were university students, professors, doctors, men and women engaging in the same environment, but yet upholding their morality like any Muslim country, any Muslim men and women should. Afghanistan is not what it was, or what you see. It was never the culture of Afghanistan
No,
at all whatsoever.
no.
And obviously what you see on TV still is not the exact culture of Afghanistan. Schools are closed, yes, but of course, who makes that decision? It's not the Afghan people, it's not Islamic, it's not nothing to do with Afghan culture whatsoever. It's
Right.
influences that control the narrative and want to control that in that way. But still, their schools are still currently open in Afghanistan, private schools, where those that can afford the girls are getting full on education.
Mm-hmm. And I think there is also a struggle within the ranks of the Taliban themselves, between the old school and the new culture of the Taliban.
In terms of women's rights and inheritance, it happens in Afghanistan, of course, but it happens even in non-Muslim countries. For example, India. If a woman is widowed, she's a Hindu woman, she has no right, she doesn't get anything
Agreed.
at all.
Yeah.
And if she has no right to his property or inheritance, if the family refuses to give it to her.
In fact, in authentic Hindu culture, a woman is supposed to kill herself if her husband dies.
Correct. Or she's supposed to just wear white the rest of her life and not wear
Live in solitude.
And live in solitude, right? Yeah. So no, what I'm describing here is not always reflective of local practices in Muslim countries. Definitely not. What I'm describing here is for you to understand what Islamic law says, because oftentimes people don't even know that this is what the Deen says. And so, again, in those instances where divorce becomes legitimate, and ayah number 20 says, وَإِنْ أَرَدْتُمُ اسْتِبْدَالَ زَوْجٍ مَكَانَ زَوْجٍ وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. Now, if you wanna divorce your wife, if you wanna replace her with somebody else, whatever, and you know that divorce is inevitable, then you wanna make sure that even if you're giving them a heap of gold in dowry, that you cannot take it back. And again, this is absolutely revolutionary because men summarily divorced and married, and they took everything that they gave the woman, and it's almost like mahar or dowry was only temporary. For as long as we're married, you keep this. But if we divorce each other, then I take it back. Again, Islam prohibited all of those practices. It's not her fault that you want to divorce her, right? Now, if it's her choice to do khula, and she's the one that is initiating the dissolution of the marriage, then maybe there's an argument to be made that, okay, you're going to get the rest of your mahar back. But if she's able to show the judge that she has a legitimate reason to dissolve the marriage, then the judge will get her divorced and have her keep the rest of her dowry as well, right? As we've seen in many examples at the Prophet's time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And by the way, here's a little tidbit here that is interesting. When it says, وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا, and you've given one of them a heap of gold, some scholars actually refer to a story that happened at the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, that it's okay sometimes to require a heap of gold as mahar. Like if a girl's family truly, like they're a powerful, wealthy family, and they feel like their daughter is the most amazing daughter, and there's a lot of guys out there that want to marry her, and they require a pretty hefty sum for dowry, even though in general we're supposed to make marriage simple and accessible, but it's still halal to require a hefty mahar. And so Umar radiallahu anhu was once giving a talk, and he was talking about the necessity of making marriage simple and lowering the amounts of dowry. So a woman stood up in the masjid and she said to him, Allah in Surat Al-Nisa values us, and he says that we can ask for heaps of gold. So Umar radiallahu anhu smiled and he says, أصابت المرأة وأخطأ عمر. The woman was right and Umar was wrong. I am not saying it's haram. So that's a choice that families can make. I'm just saying the sunnah is for us to make mahar simple and accessible so that people are able to get married actually. Yes?
I'm confused when you use the word dowry because I don't think dowry and mahar is same.
I know it's inaccurate, but it's the best word that we can find. And that, I use them alternatively, but I should just use the word mahar.
Because there is no concept of dowry in Islam per se.
Yes. Actually, dowry was given by the wife to the man. Historically speaking, it was the man that got the dowry. It was not the woman. And then like if even in Europe, right? Like if you marry a woman with a title, as a man, you get her title, but she does not get yours. You get her property, but she does not get yours, right? And so, historically speaking, dowry was actually given to the man, and I think in Hindu culture, to this day, they still do that, right?
It's illegal.
Hmm?
It's illegal now.
It is illegal, really. Yeah. I mean, I think, we were making fun of this a few months ago when, in Hindu culture, the family of the girl will pay you to marry her. Whereas, in the Islamic tradition, you have to give the girl this gift that goes to her, not to her family, so that it doesn't look like a transaction, right? Speaking of financial rights, by the way, of women, these are some of the things that women never had before, but now they're able to get, right? Now they get, number one, a sadaq. Sadaq is the remainder of their mahar. So if the man said, I will give you $10,000, but I can only give you 3 right now, then he owes 7, and that has to be given to her in the event of divorce or in the event of death, before the distribution of the inheritance, right?
Is that what they call mu'akhar?
Mu'akhar, yes. Yeah, that's another word for it. Same exact thing. And then there's also nafaqa, and nafaqa is like, alimony, right? Which she's entitled to during her iddah period, if she gets divorced. If she has children that she's taking care of, then she's entitled to her nafaqa throughout the time period when she's raising those children until they come of age and they decide whether they want to be with their mom or with their dad. And in many madhahib, she's also entitled to something that is called nafaqatul mut'a, which is if she has been unduly divorced and her life was upended and she's able to make a case to the judge that this was unjust decision, the judge will actually require her husband to pay her for at least 1 or 2 years, a monthly stipend until she's able to get back, on her feet. And one of the topics that come up all the time, obviously, is community property and so forth, because we live in these Western times where, like state of California, I think there's more than 30 or 30 plus states now in America that are community property states. So if husband and wife, if they had a divorce, they automatically just split everything 50-50, right? And while we reject that in principle, we've also seen situations where a woman would be married for 30 years. She dedicated herself as a homemaker. She did not pursue a career. She took care of her kids. She took care of her husband. She did not make any income of her own, but she supported the family to the best of her ability. And then when they get a divorce, her husband is now a millionaire. And then, she goes to the imam and she says, well, what am I entitled to? The imam says nothing. Just your nafaqah and your mut'ah, and that's it. So what about my husband's wealth? She says, well, if you want to pursue that, it would be haram. And so, again, we've been having a lot of conversations about this over the years, but one of the things that we've also found to be very useful is a Maliki perspective that is called al-kadd wa-si'aya. Effort, payment for or compensation for effort and sincere endeavors, or something like this, where the judge can also make a financial assessment as to the type of expenses that the husband saved over the years because he had that wife at home. Like, he would have had to hire a cook, he would have had to hire a mentor, he would have had to hire a Quran teacher, he would have had, if she's helping him with the books, if she shows up at the store, right, if she's helping with the business. In the Maliki madhab, they actually make it where they look at the family as you would look at a company or a corporation, and that the woman played a financial role in that family, and so she would be entitled to more than just her nafaqah and her muakhar and stuff like that. But again, this is a lengthy, fiqhi conversation that, I don't know if we have time to cover. Sorry?
Regarding divorce,
Mm-hmm.
so somewhat pointed by cultural notes as well, like a wedding or a nikah ceremony. Like in cultures, it's different, but religion, like for example, Islam kind of puts the limitations with the shahid or imam and 2 people, and that's it. But we make it where like 500 people party in a restaurant or stuff like that. That's cultural, right?
And like 6 different events.
6 different events.
Yeah.
And then, like, for example, I receive an invitation card and I go there, or my family, or my wife, or alone, or something like that. But throughout my life, I've never received a card for a divorce. These people are like 20 years married.
I hope not.
My question is, in the community, 2 people are known as husband and wife for 5 years or 30 years, it doesn't matter. But the ceremony of divorce happens behind hidden doors with one imam or even not an imam involved. We find out from the grapevine, from the word of mouth, that, oh, she's no longer married. Like, how Islamically fine is that? Because I believe, like, that card I received for 500 people with the music on, we should receive the same gathering again so they can divorce. I don't see it like, I don't hear about it, but
So no, there's a big difference between the two things. There's a huge difference. If I see a man and a woman, in the community holding hands, I think I need to know that they're married, because this is about protecting their integrity and protecting their reputation. Like, as a married man, you don't want people to see you with a woman thinking like, oh my God, what is he doing? Who is that woman he's with, right? But if you have a divorce and it doesn't concern us, oh my God, we haven't seen him with his wife in such a long time. This sounds more like us being nosy, right? Like this, it matters not to us, right? And so it matters to the community and to you that everyone knows you're married. But it doesn't really matter as much if you're divorced, right? Like it doesn't affect your reputation. It doesn't affect people's perceptions. It doesn't matter. It affects curiosity, maybe, like, but it doesn't affect anything else. And so they're not the same.
So from Islamic perspective, how big of an announcement should it be?
It doesn't have to be big at all. You know, a man divorces his wife at will. In the Sunni perspective, you don't even need witnesses. You just need to inform her wakil if he's still alive. In the Ja'fari, like in the Shia perspective, you have to have two witnesses as well. So for them, you marry with two witnesses and then you divorce with two witnesses, which actually, for me, sounds like a pretty good, legitimate, perspective. But in most Sunni scholarship is that you divorce by saying the word of talaq, and that's it.
So those two witnesses can instruct.
Yes, like when people like go on social media and then they change their relationship status, right? We have just a few minutes before Salat al-Dhuhr, and I want to go ahead and detail for you guys, and maybe next time inshallah we can ask questions about it. I will detail for you guys the prohibitions on marriage, right? So, and you will see this in ayah number 23. Yes. Mm-hmm.
About what does it mean nikah ghalib? Is the word nikah ghalib? What does it mean?
You've honored them. What gives a man the right to be intimate with a woman? What gives him the right to do that? Nothing except one thing, which is what? Is nikah, right? And so the nikah relationship is not like any other transaction. Like if I buy something from you today, I'll give you $5, I'll get a product in return, right? And this applies to every single transaction in life. It's always limited. The transaction of nikah is unlimited because you have that person 100% with every aspect of their lives, right? This woman will give that man herself in every possible way, right? And she will be his in every possible way. And so it is mithaqan ghalidha, it is the most consequential of all promises. That is, and so what the ayah basically says is that keep that in mind. This is not something simple, it's not something to take lightly. It is something that is very consequential, right? You can't just look at her and say, well, I don't like you anymore, and then divorce her and go find somebody else. And then she has to live the rest of her life having given herself fully to this man, and then he just walks out on her. Like, if you want to do that, you better make sure that you're doing this for the right reasons and that the marriage has become irreparable. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what are the permanent prohibitions? So there is permanent and then there is temporary prohibitions, right? The permanent prohibitions are the following. Number one, blood relations. Mother, daughter, sister, paternal aunt, maternal aunt, niece, brother's daughter, and sister's daughter, right? This is all permanent. You cannot marry those women ever because of blood relationships. But then there's also breastfeeding relationships that also creates a permanence in mahram. Like, you cannot marry those women either. The woman that breastfed you, your foster mother, there's also the foster sister. So basically you're both breastfed by the same woman. So if she breastfed you and then she breastfed another woman, that other woman becomes your foster sister. You cannot marry her, or milk sister, whatever they call it, right? And then there is the foster grandmother, right? So that relationship is haram as well. There's the foster aunt, there's the foster niece. All of this, becomes as permanent as blood relationships. You cannot marry any of those women.
And that's through nursing.
Through nursing, exactly. And then there is permanent prohibitions, through relationships by marriage, the mother-in-law, the stepdaughter, the stepmother, and the daughter-in-law. All right, and you will find all of this, by the way, in this particular ayah, number 23. Then there is temporary prohibitions. Married women, obviously you cannot marry them while they're married, right? Women in their iddah period, that's a temporary prohibition. Al-jam'a bayna al-ukhtayn, combining two sisters. So you have to divorce one first in order to marry the other. But you cannot marry two sisters at the same time. Marrying more than four, that would also be a temporary prohibition until you divorce one, and then you can remarry the fourth or take a fourth. Non-Muslim women that are not from Ahlul Kitab, that is also temporary prohibition until they do what? Until they convert to Islam, or maybe they become Christian or something like this, then it becomes halal. Your wife, after 3 divorces, الطلقة البائنة, so if you've divorced her the 3rd time, then that becomes temporary or permanent? It's not permanent. It's temporary. Why? Exactly. So she has to legitimately marry someone else and then has a divorce with this person, and then she wants to remarry you, right?
It has to be verbally, when the man divorces his wife verbally, or does it have to be written?
It doesn't have to be written. It doesn't have to be written. Yeah. If you say talaq to your wife, she is divorced. Also, the woman in a state of ihram, you cannot marry a woman that is in a state of ihram during umrah or hajj. That is an invalid marriage. So if you actually did nikah while the woman is in a state of ihram, that would be a void marriage. Like, it won't count. It has to be redone. Marrying a woman that is engaged in zina, like may Allah protect our families, like a prostitute, for example, someone that they call them sex workers. And so you can marry someone like this if she's ceased and desisted, kind of thing. Like, she's repented and she's given up this lifestyle, and now she's become like an honorable woman, in which case you can marry her. But if she is still engaged in this behavior, it's haram actually to have a nikah with a person like this. So, again, you will find most of these cases in ayah number 23. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us exactly who to marry and who not to marry. Now, before Islam, and I will end with this, the prohibition on marriage had more to do with class, had more to do with wealth, had more to do with money, with family, with race. Those are the lines upon which they decided whether you can marry someone or not. Oh, she's from this family, you cannot marry her. She's from that race, you cannot marry her. Islam came and abolished all of that, and he created criteria that actually make sense. These are the people that you cannot marry, which makes everyone else basically halal for you to marry. And we will continue, inshallah ta'ala, next time with ayah number 24 and what comes after. We still have a couple of minutes. Any questions? Yes.
According to the marriage, can a person marry his wife's niece? Once I hear something that, for example, someone who, for example, my wife was a man, and that person was prohibited, haram for her. Now I cannot marry her. And the example is like the niece of my
The niece of your wife is not mahram to you. Yeah, you can marry her.
like the daughter of my wife's sister. Can I marry her?
So no, let's walk through this again. So you're already married, right?
Yes.
And you are considering, well, not you, but we're just saying hypothetically. I don't want to get you in trouble. Hypothetically speaking, right? You're married, and then you're considering your wife's niece, right? As weird as it is, it would be considered halal. The only person that you cannot marry is your wife's daughter from a previous marriage, or your wife's sister, or your wife's mother, because that's your mother-in-law. But you can marry your wife's cousin or your wife's niece. Anything beyond that circle is permissible. I don't recommend it, but it's permissible. Any other questions?
I just want to comment.
Yes.
I think we talked about a lot of really good stuff in this session. I think a lot of
the knowledge that I was given, and he will give them the guidance, you know, and I couldn't even imagine being a single parent. I mean, it's just, I can't even imagine. It's like the resources are so limited, and you've got to do your due diligence, make sure there's quality resource. So I'm just curious to understand if there's that sort of thought process for you guys as well as the administrator for like the Mia Center, for example, to say we are looking to enhance that. 'Cause it's
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, so we there's so many things involved in this. Just to answer that question, and so number one, we do we require premarital counseling. So before you get married, if you want the tarbiyah imams to conduct your nikah, we have to go through premarital counseling. We sit down with the couples for about 2 hours. Every single nikah that we do, we have to sit down with the couple, and this is some of the things that we talk about, right? And so that is required per our policy. You know, at least 2 to 3 times a year, we have parenting workshops where we actually bring, you know, experts on the subject that would conduct maybe like a Friday evening and like a Saturday seminar in order to just answer questions and talk about, you know, parenting tricks and so on and so forth. I do believe that the conversations that we have, let's say, at the Tafseerah program, are also important in the sense that it's disseminating knowledge in the community. I mean, not everyone is here, obviously. This is such a small percentage. But you guys also represent many, many people in the community, and this knowledge somewhat finds its way. You know, it trickles down into the community. You will have these conversations with your kids. You will have these conversations with your friends. And so now that your mind is in the right headspace, then you're able to articulate that knowledge. And so it's impossible for this to be discussed in the khutbah. You cannot talk to 1,500 people about the nitty-gritty details, you know, of inheritance law or parenting. You know, we focus on spiritual things and just, you know, putting things in perspective for the community. But you guys will take this knowledge, inshallah, and hopefully disseminate it. I also want to emphasize individual responsibility. You know, parents, or couples who have not had children yet, or maybe couples who are now having young children, it's their responsibility to make sure that they're tethered to the support system of their community. And I always say this, by the way, in the khutbah. I always say, some of you guys, you think you're going to do it alone, and then when your kids get messed up, you come to us when they're 16 and 17, and then it becomes very difficult to fix it then, right? And so we always have the you know, sort of like these statements made, hoping that couples and parents will take advantage of the existing programs, you know, of Sunday school, of summer camp. You know, mashallah, we have like, you know, these about 30 families or 35 families that are brave enough to send their teenagers with us to Malaysia, inshallah, in the summer. And so, you know, I feel like the community is responding favorably. And I think we are gradually doing better. We have a stronger sense of identity in this particular community, I think, compared to many masajid. There's a stronger sense of belonging. You know, there is a feeling of pride. And that's so important, because then you're thinking like, this is my community, these are my people. And then you're holding yourself accountable and you're working as hard as possible to improve. So while, aside from a few examples, I can't think of something like tangible, like an actual product about, you know, aside from this, an occasional seminar that we're doing for parenting, but I think that the overall culture and philosophy of tarbiyah enhances good parenting. I hope at least that is the case, and we need to do more of those like sort of piecemeal programs. Yes?
Yeah, I think the information is there for people who want to know, who want to learn, like what we're doing today. You know, they can go online and and see the tafsirah.
It's available at least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just relate the information to whoever.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's on YouTube as well, you know, as a resource, you know, so for people to.
variable we have in this community is you have an influx of new families that come in, and it's like, you know, it just, you come to America and the culture is just so drastically different. It hits them in the face. And some people react in a very 180 contrast, and they do things that are not very, you know, productive. And so that sort of thing, I think, is also a variable that might be worth considering. And I'm just kind of bringing this up. I think that everything that touched on, I think Tarbiyah is a solid foundation. And, you know, we take a lot of pride in being a part of this
Right.
And now you've got parents that come in that don't speak the language. You've got kids that are environments are very questionable, and they really are. They don't know how to reach their inclinations, right? So it's a problem.
Subhanallah. Yes.
Very quickly, I would like to emphasize something that's, that's been becoming really issue with the young generation, our children, like in their 20s, 24s, even in their 30s. The biggest issue that I am noticing, talking to people, having, like talking to mothers who have sons and talking to mothers who have daughters, they don't have, there is no, I would say, like opportunities for those young people to meet and to to engage, to know there's like very smart girls, Muslim girls, beautiful, educated, but don't have opportunities to meet those young men. And I was wondering, maybe in the future, Tarbiyah can have maybe some counselors, the imam, and create those opportunities for those. I have three daughters. I know many people who have like sons, but there's no opportunities for those young Muslims to meet. And it's becoming really issue. There are those who are in their 30s, they can find husbands.
Right.
So, it's becoming really, and I was wondering, as a community, how can we think about it? How can we create maybe,
No, that's definitely a very important subject, and one that deserves a lot of attention, from us. I have a lot to say about this. I don't know if we have enough time today to address that.
just something to maybe we can think of.
But I do agree. I do agree that it's definitely becoming a pressing thing. Like I have a list, of at least 30, 40 girls, and I don't have anything on my guys list. I don't have any names. It's just mostly girls.
That's true.
Yeah. And this has to do with a million factors, but inshallah, maybe at some point we need to talk about that a little bit more.
As a community, we are ready to be, to work, as a community. I know many people, I know psychologists who like the idea, who are Muslim. They are, new imam, and there's so many things that we can maybe.
The thing is, Sister Phila, I think that you and I also take the concept of marriage or the desire to get married for granted. Many kids in this generation, marriage is not the default choice for them.
I know, that's so true.
It's not the default. Like, I could get married, but I'm not necessarily keen about getting married. I think society and culture have created alternatives of fulfillment for those boys and girls, and so career success and college and university and PhD and becoming a doctor and moving to Boston and explicit material and OnlyFans and all of that. This stuff has provided alternatives. And so I think we need to reestablish the importance of marriage to begin with, and then work on finding them those opportunities.
That's so funny that you're saying so, just quickly. We were celebrating my daughter's 29th birthdays, and she was talking about what she wants to do in the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, traveling, I would like to visit and complete my 50 countries. I want to visit other countries. I want to do, but she didn't even mention.
Marriage is not one of them.
I was like I was waiting.
Yes. What about building a family? Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. I think this is definitely problematic. Yes?
I think, unfortunately, that comes from when Muslim parents concentrate so much. We concentrate so much to our children that get your education first, then marriage comes, complete your education, focus, and especially to girls, I see that's emphasized so much. You have to be independent, which I agree. You have to complete your education, which I agree. It's very important. Women have a strong role in their marriage and as mothers, but the emphasization of marriage is not given to them.
Mm-mm.
Because again, if you're raising your children in a Muslim household, then the fundamentals of Islam has to be given to them. That's your choice, whether you want to. You don't have to. Okay? If you do, then growing up, they will always have in the back of their mind that marriage is important. Marriage is on top of my list as equal as my education.
Right.
Okay? Because you don't want them to engage in zina. Then what happens when you engage in zina in the Western culture? It goes from one relationship
Their processed thoughts, their influences is going to unfortunately influence them because they're like sponges, they're young, right? And by the time we reach their parents after 4 or 5 years of coming home, parents have the expectations of them to be married. That 5-year gap away from their culture and their religion and upbringing has drastically changed that person.
Right. Agreed.
So that's not in their mind. Their mind, you gave me the freedom to go to Boston, to go to New York. You told me to be independent. I'm doing all those things you taught me, but you never mentioned why marriage is
Yeah.
important.
Why now? Why are you
Why
talking?
now?
Yeah, why
And
now?
it gets difficult and harder as it does.
Right. We've definitely gone above and beyond our time today. Jazakallah khair, and I appreciate your patience. You know, you guys were here for 2 hours. I don't know if I can handle a religious program at the masjid for 2 hours. May Allah bless you and increase you in knowledge and patience. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. العصر إنسان في خسر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, we're going to pray Salat al-Dhuhr right now. Hey Shamus, do you want to say adhan? Assalamu alaikum. How you doing, brother?
Brother Musa, can I talk to you?
Pleasure to meet you. We're gonna pray right now. If you wanna